On the banks of the Mincio River in 452 AD, an old priest in simple white robes stepped onto the shore. No one knelt. Before him stood a silent, scarred army, Attila the Hun's warriors. The sun glinted off 100,000 spear tips. This was not a negotiation, it was an execution. History calls it a miracle. A lie. What if Attila, the Scourge of God, the man who burned civilizations, didn't just meet this priest? What if he desperately wanted to? What unsettling bargain did they strike that day, a transaction so powerful it still echoes in your own life? What does it say about the things you value most? To understand the sheer desperation of this moment, you need to erase the image of the Colosseum in ruins from your mind. You must instead picture Rome in 452 AD as it truly was, a sprawling, decadent, and profoundly vulnerable metropolis. The Western Roman Empire was a hollowed-out carcass, picked clean by decades of civil war, corruption, and incompetence. Its government had fled to the more defensible city of Ravenna, leaving Rome and its estimated 100,000 souls as a symbolic prize, fat and waiting for the slaughter. The man at its gates was Attila, king of a nomadic empire stretching from the Danube to the Ural Mountains. His rise had been meteoric and brutal. He had murdered his own brother, Bleda, to secure sole power in 445, and had spent the subsequent years systematically blackmailing and terrorizing the Eastern Roman Empire into paying him crippling amounts of gold just to exist. He was not a barbarian in a bearskin. He was a geopolitical strategist of terrifying genius, a master of logistics and psychological warfare who wielded destruction as a political instrument. His pretext for invading Italy was a message he had received years earlier, in 450, from a desperate Roman princess named Justa Grata Honoria. She had sent him her ring, begging him to rescue her from a forced marriage, an act Attila cynically interpreted as a marriage proposal, giving him a claim to half the Western Empire as his dowry. A year before this meeting on the river, in 451, a Roman general named Flavius Aetius had managed to fight Attila to a bloody standstill at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains in Gaul, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. Aetius's army was a fragile coalition of Romans, Visigoths, and Franks, and it had melted away after the battle. Now, in 452, Aetius had no army left to command. Attila had stormed into Italy unopposed, and he had made an example of the city of Aquileia, razing it so completely that 50 years later it was reportedly impossible to tell where it had even stood. He had sacked the great northern cities of Mediolanum, Milan, and Ticinum, Pavia, his armies sweeping through the Po Valley like a grass fire. The road to Rome was wide open. There were no legions to stop him. There was no emperor brave enough to face him. There was only Leo. The chain of events that led Leo to that riverbank began not with prayer, but with panic. In the imperial court at Ravenna, Emperor Valentinian III was preparing to flee Italy altogether, a coward king ready to abandon his own capital. The Roman Senate, a body of wealthy aristocrats, was paralyzed by a terror so profound they could barely function. Every report from the north brought worse news. Cities burned, populations massacred, and the Hunnic cavalry moving with unnatural speed. You need to understand that the Huns were not just an army to the Romans. They were a species of monster. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus described them as being so frightfully ugly, they seemed like two-legged beasts, men who grew old without beards because their faces were ritually slashed in childhood to prevent hair from growing, creating a mask of horrifying scars. This was the force that was now less than 200 miles from Rome. It was in this atmosphere of absolute despair that the Roman general Aetius, the only man alive who truly understood Attila's mind, made a chilling calculation. If you were in that chamber, you would have felt a cold dread settle in your stomach as Aetius, the hero of the Catalonian plains, argued against a military response. He knew he had no army. He knew any force he could muster would be annihilated. The only weapon Rome had left, he argued, was its treasury. They could not fight Attila, so they had to buy him. The decision was made to send an embassy, a final desperate gamble. They chose 3 men, a high-ranking senator named Gennadius Avienus, a former city prefect named Trigetius, who had negotiated with other barbarians before, and the Bishop of Rome, Leo. The inclusion of Leo was a masterstroke of political theater. He wasn't just a priest, he was Pope Leo I, a figure of immense moral authority, a man believed to speak for God himself. Their journey north was a pilgrimage through hell. They traveled along roads choked with refugees fleeing south, past farms that were now just smoldering piles of black timber, the air heavy with the sweet, sickening smell of decay. With every mile, they were moving deeper into the dragon's maw. Meanwhile, Attila was encamped, considering his options. He had achieved his primary objective. He had shattered Roman morale and proven that no one, not even Aetius, could stand in his way. He was weighing the immense plunder of Rome against the risks. His army, a vast horde of men and horses, was beginning to suffer from the famine that gripped Italy that year. Even more worrying, disease was starting to spread through his camps. His shamans, his spiritual advisors, were warning him that Rome was a cursed city for invaders, reminding him of Alaric the Visigoth, who had sacked Rome in 410 only to die of a sudden fever just a few months later. Attila was a deeply superstitious man, and these warnings carried immense weight. So when he received word that an embassy was approaching, led by the high priest of the Roman religion, he agreed to meet them. He was not interested in their prayers. He was interested in the terms of their surrender. The official story, the one you've been told, is that Leo's commanding presence and divine words moved the pagan king to repentance. This is a comforting fiction. The truth is that this meeting was a transaction, pure and simple. It was the culmination of a vast, coordinated strategy of which Leo was only the public face. The real negotiations were about to begin, and they had nothing to do with saving souls. The worst part hadn't happened yet. The betrayal was not personal, it was systemic. It was the final, shuddering gasp of an empire that had forgotten how to be itself. For 800 years, the Roman response to a threat like Attila was the legion. It was discipline, iron, and the absolute certainty that the world belonged to them. But the men who made that decision in Ravenna were not the descendants of Scipio Africanus. They were the descendants of accountants and landlords. When Leo stood before Attila, he was not just a priest representing a city. He was the symbol of a civilization that had chosen to pay tribute instead of shedding blood. He was the living embodiment of a Rome that had lost its nerve. Think about the man forced to watch this unfold, Flavius Aetius. He had spent his youth as a hostage among the Huns. He knew their language, their customs, their way of thinking. He had used that knowledge to defeat Attila in a battle so vast and bloody that the historian Jordanes claimed 165,000 men died on both sides. He was the last of the true Romans, a warrior in a world of cowards. And now he had to stand by, powerless, as his emperor sent a bishop to beg for terms from the very man Aetius had beaten on the field of honor. This was the moment the Roman eagle didn't just fall, it groveled. It was the admission that the Roman sword was broken, and all that was left was the Roman purse. Think about the person you trust most in the world to have your back in a fight. Now imagine them turning to you, in the moment of greatest crisis, and telling you it's just easier to pay the enemy off. That is the betrayal Aetius felt. It was the death of an idea. The idea that Rome was worth fighting for. But the actual surrender of Rome was only the first part of their astonishing plan. And this is where you must zoom out from that single meeting on the riverbank to see the terrifyingly coordinated machine that was actually at work. This wasn't a desperate plea. It was a multi-pronged assault, and Leo's embassy was just the distraction. The first part of the real bargain was brutally simple: gold. The historian Priscus, who actually traveled with a Roman embassy to Attila's court years earlier, makes it clear that a massive tribute was paid. Sacks of gold, the entire remaining wealth of the Roman state, were handed over. Rome was not saved, it was ransomed. You are no longer watching a miracle. You are watching the largest protection racket payment in history. But here's what should make you deeply uncomfortable. While Attila was distracted by Leo and the promise of Italian gold, something else was happening hundreds of miles away. The new emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople, a tough former soldier named Marcian, had broken with the old policy of appeasement. He had stopped paying tribute to the Huns. And at the exact time Attila was deep in Italy, Marcian dispatched his own armies across the Danube River, launching a surprise attack on the unprotected Hunnic heartlands. Attila's base of power, the source of his recruits and supplies, was suddenly under direct assault. His supply lines were cut. He was trapped in a hostile country with a starving army and an enemy at his back. This wasn't chaos, it was a plan. The third prong of the attack was invisible. Italy itself was fighting back, not with soldiers, but with pestilence. The Roman fever, likely a form of malaria or dysentery, was running rampant through the Hunnic camps. Attila's army, accustomed to the wide-open plains of Central Asia, was dying in the swampy, fever-ridden climate of an Italian summer. His numbers were dwindling every day. His shamans were not wrong to be afraid. The decision to retreat was not an act of mercy. It was a cold, hard, strategic calculation made by a commander who realized he was being checkmated. Leo was simply the public face of this maneuver, the acceptable, sanitized version of the story. The truth was a brutal combination of bribery, backstabbing, and biological warfare. But none of that prepared anyone for the most secret clause in their agreement. The one promise that explains what they found in Attila's bedchamber exactly 1 year later. What they found in the records of that meeting, and what was confirmed by Attila's actions afterward, was the real price of Rome. It wasn't just gold. It was a promise of legitimacy. According to historical accounts, Attila would leave Italy, and in return the Emperor Valentinian would honor the proposal of his sister, Honoria. Attila would be married into the imperial family. He would become not a barbarian invader, but a Roman in-law, with a legal, dynastic claim to half of the empire he had just failed to conquer. This is the secret you were never meant to know. Attila's ultimate ambition was not to destroy Rome. It was to become Rome. He didn't want to burn the palace. He wanted to sit on the throne. He was tired of being the Scourge of God, the eternal outsider. He wanted to found a dynasty that would last 1,000 years. He wanted the one thing his terror could never win him, respect. And Leo, or rather the Roman state he represented, gave it to him. They offered him a future. And in that moment, Attila the Hun ceased to exist. What you now understand, and what most people never will, is that this bargain didn't save Rome. It killed Attila. The entire Hunnic Empire was a predatory economic system built on a single principle: constant, violent expansion. War produced plunder, and plunder was used to buy the loyalty of the tribal chieftains who followed him. The system required a constant forward momentum of destruction. The moment Attila accepted a diplomatic solution, the moment he took the gold and the promise of a future marriage instead of sacking the city, he broke his own machine. He had chosen stability over chaos, legitimacy over plunder. To his warriors, this wasn't an unforgivable act of weakness. Their leader, the man who lived for war, had just accepted a payoff to go home. The systemic truth is this: a revolutionary force cannot survive becoming the establishment. The moment the wolf agrees to guard the sheep, it is no longer a wolf. The year after he left Italy, in 453, Attila did what he had promised. He took a new bride, a Gothic princess named Ildico, perhaps as a placeholder while he waited for Honoria. On his wedding night, he celebrated, drank heavily, and retired to his chambers. The next morning, he was found dead, lying in a pool of his own blood. He had not been assassinated. He hadn't choked. A blood vessel in his throat had reportedly burst, and in his drunken stupor he had drowned. It was a pathetic, ignominious end for the most feared man in the world. But it was not an accident. It was the system correcting itself. His empire, built on fear and violence, could not tolerate a leader who was trying to become a Roman emperor. The stress of that internal conflict of trying to be two opposite things at once literally broke him from the inside out. His empire disintegrated almost overnight, his sons fighting over the scraps until they were erased from history. He wasn't defeated by an army. He was defeated by an idea. The answer to the question you've been sitting with this entire video is now brutally clear. Why did Attila turn back from the gates of Rome? He turned back because he was offered a deal that was infinitely better than loot. He was offered a crown. He was offered a dynasty. He was offered a place in the system he had spent his entire life trying to burn down. The meeting with Leo wasn't a moment of divine intervention. It was a corporate merger. Attila agreed to it because of the coordinated pressure from the Eastern Roman army at his back and the plague devastating his front, but most of all because it fulfilled his deepest, most secret ambition. And that leads us to the deeper truth, the one that implicates you. What is the one currency more powerful than fear? It is the desperate human desire for legitimacy. It is the need to be seen not as a monster, but as a king. It is the dream of building something that will outlast you. Attila, the man who had everything, lacked the one thing he could not take by force: acceptance. The Romans couldn't defeat him with swords, so they defeated him with a contract. They offered him a seat at their table, knowing full well that the chair was poisoned. He traded the apocalypse for a legacy, and the price of that legacy was his own life. We return to that image, the old man in white robes walking alone toward a silent army on the banks of a muddy river. The story they told you was about the power of faith. The story you now know is about the power of a well-timed offer. That same negotiation is still happening right now in your world. It doesn't happen on riverbanks, it happens in boardrooms and on television screens. A new disruptive force emerges, threatening to tear down the old order. And the system, wise and ancient, does not send an army to fight it. It sends an emissary with a contract. It offers a title, a fortune, a place on the inside. It offers legitimacy. The most effective way to neutralize a rebel is to give them a kingdom. The next time you see a powerful figure suddenly change their tune, remember that Attila had the world at his feet, and he still took the deal. If you want to know what happened after, that story is even darker.